Penn State football here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel and 99.5 The Bus.
Landon Tengwall, Penn State football. Test, 1 2 1 2.
You guys do it one more time.
1 2, check.
Live from the Blaze Alexander Family Dealership Studios. WBUS HD1 Center Hall, WJUN Mexico. 99.5, 107.5, The Bus.
Welcome to the Penn State Football Tailgate Show on 99.5, 107.5 The Bus and Bigfoot Country Legends, driven by the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships and broadcast in cooperation with BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll get you ready for today's game with the most extensive Penn State football coverage from the experts. The Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate 2024 is powered by Your Cigar Den and Monte Cristo Lounge, Stalker Chevrolet, Beer Belly's Beverage, Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships, the Penn State All Sports Museum, Lion Country Kia, Ben Franklin Technology Partners, Bobby Ray Hall Honda of State College, the Applied Research Laboratory at Penn State University, Joel Comfort Toyota BMW, the Dalton Group at Morgan Stanley, Center County Recycling, Bobby Ray Hall Lexus of Lewistown, the Student Bookstore, W.R. Hickey Beer Distributor, Roofing King, Cata, Triangle Heating and Cooling, Happy Valley Sports and Entertainment Alliance, and by Celebrities at the Ramada. Now, the Penn State Football Tailgate Show on 99.5, 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and simulcast on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Now, here's Thomas Frank Carr and Landon Tengwall.
If not now, when? It seems that the stars have finally aligned for the Penn State football team in 2024. The college football playoff expands to 12 teams this year. The Big Ten also expanded, adding 4 teams from the Pac-12. Yet for Penn State football, the purgatory of facing Ohio State and Michigan each season is finally over. But as we sit here on August 31st, the team has a favorable schedule. College football national champion runner-up Washington travels to Happy Valley with a new coaching staff, quarterback, and offense. The team gets Ohio State at home this year, and they have over a month to prepare for a tricky trip to USC in early October. But that long road starts today in the team's most precarious game of the season. They start out hot out of the gates against a rabid West Virginia Mountaineers team in Morgantown. Can they survive the game and get a win? So I ask you again, if not now, when? We're talking about that today on the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate 2024. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Joining me this year is Landon Tengwall from Behind the Wall podcast, and of course, former Penn State offensive lineman. Landon, welcome to the show.
T. Frank, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited about this one. It's going to be exciting. I'm stepping into the shoes of my man Aeneas Hawkins. We've had some big-time former Penn State football players on here, so I'm excited to get going. But we're going to have a good time on this show and really get it going. We're bringing the energy. T. Frank came in here screaming this morning. He's getting me ready to go. I feel like I'm ready to play again, man. So
this is my game day. Yeah, this is what I got.
Let's go. I'm excited to get into it, man. Let's do it.
This is the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate 2024, celebrating more than 40 years of service to the community. Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships has a vehicle to fit your budget and transportation needs. Home of the $1,000 lowest price guarantee with over 20 locations throughout Pennsylvania. Landon, let's set the scene. Let's talk about this game. Let's talk about the season. I kind of ran down in the beginning what's at stake this year for Penn State football. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the importance and the meaning of this season.
Yeah, I think you hit it well there with we are in a 12-team playoff now. It is time to go for James Franklin and company. We have to, first off, we got to get to the playoffs, and I think that Nittany Nation would not be happy with anything except at least one playoff win. I mean, that is the bar minimum expectation for Penn State this year. I think we have a favorable schedule. We don't have Michigan this year. We really only have one game that we are not going to be favored in. That'll be Ohio State. A couple other tough games like we have today at USC, at Wisconsin, Washington at home with the whiteout. But this year it presents the opportunity where you have a lot of stars on this team where you're talking about Denia, Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter, KJ Winston, Katron Allen, Tyler Warren, Drew Aller, all these guys very well could not be here next year.
Yeah.
So saying that to say, this team, I don't want to get too far ahead. We're playing West Virginia today, but this team could take a little bit of a step back with all the star power we're going to lose after this year. it's go time this year for James Franklin and company to win something big.
There's two things that I think are interesting here, and you hit on it, I think, really well, talking about essentially the class of 2022. This is a class that came in top 5 in recruiting. The expectations for them have been very high throughout their career already, with some of these guys, as you mentioned, Abdul Carter, Nick Singleton, starting as freshmen, and then maybe not taking the step that we thought in 2023. But now it kind of reminds me a little bit of the 2020 season, where you had a team with Micah Parsons and all kinds of talent, Journey Brown, that was expected to push for a college football playoff berth, and we were robbed of that because of the pandemic and because of the season and how it unfolded. So is this a redemption opportunity for Penn State football in this year to finally put one of those runs together with an elite talent at the back of it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you think back to 2017, 2018, where it kind of, I'd say it almost feels more like that than 2020, where we have all the talent in the world. We have a couple big games. Now it's, can we show up and can we perform when it counts the most? And I think that starts today. It is going to be loud. The fans are going to be drunk. We saw it yesterday on the Pat McAfee show. I was talking with Steve Jones, the voice of Penn State. I shared this story on my platforms a couple times, but he was telling me back in '82, they went down to Morgantown and beat up on them per usual. He said, well, I had an interview with Joe Paterno afterwards in the van. It was out back. And he got Joe. They snuck him out back into the van. And, it was in the '80s, so they had to do it in the van. And next thing he knows, the van starts rocking back and forth. The West Virginia fans found out that Joe Paterno was in the van and tried to tip him. So needless to say, this is going to be a ruthless environment for Penn State.
There's one player probably that has more pressure and more spotlight on him than any other player on the roster, and that is kicker. I'm kidding. It's Drew Aller. Obviously, quarterback Drew Aller comes into this season, I don't know, with high expectations, because there is such a polarizing split on his 2023 season. You can point to the 2 interceptions and the excellent stats from a ball security and management perspective, and then you can flip on the tape and you can see the situations that you and I studied this offseason that he was in against Michigan and Ohio State, and all of those feels, like the moments and the plays that you feel each year are not rosy from last year. So I guess, what is your expectation of him in this game?
Yeah, look, I think last year he had his coming out party against West Virginia, and I think that was almost kind of hurtful to the rest of his year for his expectations.
Yes.
Because it was like, hey, Drew Aller, this is Heisman season now. 325, 3 touchdowns, open the season. I mean, that was what we expected him to have the rest of the year. And, a couple things teetered off. I mean, Keandre Lambert-Smith had a great game and didn't have a game even close to that the rest of the season. But me and T. Frank did a Drew Aller film breakdown, and there was a lot of things we talked about. We did not stretch the field enough. There was not a deep threat that was scaring teams to where they had to back up. They were able to load up that box. They were able to come and bring those corners down a little bit. They were playing near the line of scrimmage, near the first down marker. There just wasn't that threat of, hey, they're going to go deep on us. Wasn't there. And then on top of that, no one making plays for Drew Aller. That was a theme, especially we looked at in the Peach Bowl, but I think a lot of games. And you can point to Michigan. You can point to Ohio State. I've talked about the fact that Drew Aller at Ohio State, his first big road game ever, and he was forced to throw the ball 42 times. That's not a recipe for success for a young quarterback at all. And just to put this number out there, to talk about success for Drew today, I would say to keep the ball on the ground, play turnover-free football, and like I said, let the young offensive line get going on the run game. It's a lot easier for a young offensive lineman to kind of gel in the run game than it is in the pass game. There's a little bit more pressure there. And to give you this stat, I went and looked. When Drew Aller throws over 35 times, Penn State is 1-2.
Interesting. Yep. I was going to say, at the start of that thought, I was like, this sounds exactly like last year. Why would it be any different if we're like, hey, don't have the quarterback throw the football? But I think that it's an important point to make about balance, especially within any system. He was a first-year starter last year. You would hope that number of 1-2, when he has to be the guy, improves this year, but it doesn't have to be in game 1. We're going to get into more of the matchups coming up in just a little bit, but I do want to ask you here to start this, is something I've been talking about all offseason, and something James Franklin has talked about all offseason, is integrating 3 new coordinators onto the team with the expectations we just discussed on this team for the season, and not starting over from a execution standpoint or from an ability standpoint. So what they have done this offseason, for people who are tuning in for the first time, haven't been following Penn State football, they have streamlined the integration process of those coaches, where they took as much of the verbiage as possible, the coded language in football, and tried to make that as similar as it was to last season, so that these players can get up to speed more quickly. Landon, from your experience of going through, did you go through 2 offensive coordinators?
I only had Mike Yurcich. So when I came in is when they were making the switch from Kirk Soraka over to Mike Yurcich. And I will tell you, I saw the playbook. I kind of knew what it looked like in 2020 with Kirk Soraka. I mean, look, it wasn't that different. They did a pretty good job there. But I think my biggest takeaway was the offense didn't feel any different at all with that switch from 2020 to 2021. It was pretty similar. And now, as much as you want to keep that verbiage the same and allow it to be easy for the players to understand it quickly and kind of adapt, at the same time, it needs to still look a little bit different, be a little bit different. We need to be fresh, and I think the biggest thing is play for your coach. Be excited. When players are playing inspired by their coach and their play calling, they're going to play better. When you're excited, we're about to run this play, this motion's really going to get them, or this trick play is really going to, catch them up. That's exciting as a player. You kind of get a little hype. Yeah. And then going back to last time we had 3 new coordinators, was 2016 season. I do think the expectations were a little bit different then. 2015, we just got over Hackenberg getting sacked 10 times against Temple. I didn't even know that was a thing until a little bit ago. So clearly, I was spared that type of thing. Sorry, guys, for going back that far. But that was the last time we had 3 new coordinators all in one season. Yeah. Expectations were not nearly as high. But at the same time, I mean, we have some really, really good coordinators, at least we think to be really good coordinators coming in. So I think the expectations are really high for these guys, and they have a talented group on both sides of the ball. So
expectations, although the pressure was different in 2016 because it was coming off that year, and of course this was a very different situation, but I think the pressure there was talk of firing Franklin at that point, and then all of a sudden in that Minnesota game, this is now the Penn State football history hour as we rehash 2016. I guess the question I'm interested in is, how hard is it to learn a new offense if you aren't afforded those shortcuts? How difficult is football to pick up for, let's say, a young player who has to play this year, maybe for a second-year player or a third-year player who has only ever been through one offense? How difficult and challenging can that be? And do you think that it was a wise move to try and integrate this way?
Yeah, I think it can be really difficult because not only, you have your base plays and your plays, but the biggest thing to know is when this happens. Hey, when the D-line does this, or when the linebacker reacts this way, what do I do? I mean, you basically, for a play, you have to have 4, 5, 6 answers to what the defense is going to do to then judge how you react. Mm-hmm. And that is, sounds good, but you got to react in 0.5 seconds. So it's really it's difficult to learn that new offense. And then, talk about the biggest piece of it, I think, and that's confidence. If you don't have confidence in what you're running, knowing it like the back of your hand, you're going to struggle a little bit and you're going to move just a little bit slower. That gives the defense the advantage. And so I think that's the biggest thing that Kotelnicki was trying to do here, is make sure that Drew was comfortable in his reads. The lingo, the language was very similar for the offensive line, for the wide receivers. Now, we heard Caden Saunders say after the spring game, hey, you only saw about 5% of our true offense. Yeah. And I think that's true. I think there's going to be a ton of pre-snap motion. I think we will see Drew a little bit more read option. I mean, we saw a lot of that in practice. I'm excited to see how involved Bo Pabula is going to be. If I had to give an estimate, I'd say like 4 to 5 plays, I think we could see him. It sounds like Kotelnicki is excited about having the opportunity of having Bo as that second quarterback. So,
I having done some research and going all the way back to his time at Wisconsin Whitewater. Again, if you want to, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, if you want to check out all that stuff, I was doing some deep diving this offseason on Andy Kotelnicki. He is committed to getting the best players on his team that can make plays the football in a situation that is to their advantage. That is the offense. So people have asked me all offseason, what's this offense look like? What's this offense look like? And to a degree, I know, because I know the strengths and weaknesses of the players on the Penn State roster, but I don't know how he's going to apply those strengths and weaknesses within the structure of what he does on game day. That is still, I think, an unknown, but Bo Pribula will be a part of it. I've been saying all offseason, you said 4 to 5 plays. I'm going to go a little bit broader, a little bit bigger picture. I think anywhere from 7 to 10% of the offense, he could be on the field. So that's 70 plays a season, maybe 100 plays if you have 1,000 plays in a football season. I don't know. I think that breaks down to about what you just said over the course of 12 games, but I'm not a mathematician, and I've learned my lesson. I will not do mental math on camera.
Yeah, that's not a good idea at all. Look, I mean, I think there's some games we'll see Bo more and less.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what that thought process is going to be with week 1. This is our first game as a new offense. Is it going to be, hey, we're going to get Bo integrated from the jump, or are we going to take a little bit of time? I also want to see him in those bigger, more important games, which kind of is today. Yeah. It was like Michigan, Ohio State. We didn't really see Bo that much. And, you look at the Peach Bowl. He came in and provided a huge spark in the Peach Bowl. I think it was second quarter, third quarter. Came in, had a read option, kept it, gained about 10, 11 yards.
Yep.
Then he threw the 40-yard touchdown pass to Nick Singleton. That is also something I want to talk about, is Nick Singleton, getting him involved in the passing game. I think he's going to be a huge target for Drew Aller this year.
Yeah.
And Coach Franklin talked about having Katron Allen and Nick Singleton on the field at the same time, as opposed to switching off reps. It's going to be exciting. I think the biggest thing, the biggest success, walking away from this game for Andy Kotelnicki is obviously, hey, we won the game. But I want to come away and say, hey, that offense, it looked different.
You got to feel good.
You got to feel good. You got to win the game. But I want to step away and say, hey, it looked a little different out there. It just looked, and most people, you don't really know exactly what's different. You're not supposed to. You're just watching it. You're enjoying the game.
Right.
But to the naked eye, I think the offense should just look a little bit different. Like I said, I don't know exactly what that is. I do know it's going to be a lot of pre-snap motions, which what that does puts the defense at a disadvantage. When you are constantly motioning someone back and forth. Intentionally.
Because they motioned last year, but I don't know that it necessarily.
If it had any method to the madness, I'm not sure about that. But, it makes linebackers, DBs, they have to react when someone moves. So you can make someone move to a place that you want them to be and give you leverage on the other side to run it, pass it, whatever it may be. So I'm excited to see Andy Kotelnicki get going.
I love offenses that move the chess pieces around the board intentionally, and I think that's what you get with Andy Kotelnicki. The last thing I want to get to, because we're gonna get to the matchups later in the show, but I want to talk about the importance of this game and getting out of here with a win and setting up the big picture we talked about, because as much as football is statistically driven, and all of those things are important in the decision-making process for the College Football Playoff Committee, I think it also, vibes matter. So let's just run down Penn State's September after this game. At West Virginia today, Bowling Green, bye, Kent State, Illinois, who Luke Altmaier looked a little bit better this year. That might be a better game on September 28th. And then UCLA at USC. If they do not win this game, they are going to October 12th for the next game that anyone's going to seriously care about. And I know that's the way it is for a lot of teams, but when you don't have a home date and you don't have a big opponent in the month of September, do they fall to the back burner? Are they stuck at 14 in the playoff rankings or all of those rankings heading into October, just outside, and then you got a big matchup a couple thousand miles away on the West Coast, 3 time zones away? This is an important game from that perspective.
Yeah, look, I think you can go 10-2 this year and still make the 12-team playoff. But I think if you lose today in West Virginia, it becomes an immense more pressure on Drew Aller's shoulders, on James Franklin's shoulders, because it's like, hey, we can maybe drop that Ohio State game, but now when we go back-to-back weeks, now there's a bye in between, away at USC, we go bye week, and then at Wisconsin. But you start to have a lot more pressure on you, and it's like I kind of want to be able to be afforded one of those losses down the road as opposed to week 1.
Right.
So I think a loss here would be really, really detrimental to the rest of Penn State's football season and put a lot of pressure on them where, this is a somewhat younger team, and we talked about a lot of the top players, but there's not a ton of like old heads where you think, like, I was on that 2022 Rose Bowl team where it was PJ Mustafa, Sean Clifford, Jair Brown, that leadership. I've never been around anything like that. I've been around the team. I don't think the leadership is as good as that year.
Right.
I would be a little bit worried if we start to drop a couple games early is this team going to start to fold a little bit? So I think starting out today with a win at West Virginia it'd just be huge. I mean, you think back to Purdue in 2022, we barely snuck out of Purdue with a win. If anybody remembers that catch that got overturned on, was it 3rd or 4th down by Purdue's tight end, they decided to overturn it to an incomplete catch. We got the ball. The rest of the story, we ended up winning. If we would have lost that game, we wouldn't have ended up at the Rose Bowl. We wouldn't have been in New Year's Six Bowl.
Yeah.
It would have completely changed the entire 2022 season. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this season. If we don't come away with a win today, I'm kind of nervous on how the rest of this outlook of the season looks like for Penn State football.
We have an awesome crowd here on 99.5 The Bus and on Bigfoot Legends. And, of course, on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, our live stream, which you can check this out. There, of course, check out Landon on Behind the Landon, give your YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's Behind the Wall with Landon Tengwall, YouTube, and then any social medias is just Landon Tengwall, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you get your stuff.
And, of course, here on the chat, we have people who donate to the channel. Always appreciate our regulars here. Stephen Light, he donated to the channel, says, happy to see game day up and running again. Franklin Fanatic, it all starts today. Great alignment. Let's go, Franklin, he says. And 2 kids, 1 wife, all PSU says, love this game day duo of T. Frank and L. Tank. You just got a new name.
I'm getting new nicknames.
You get new nicknames.
I'm pulling
keep it up,
chat.
he says. All right, so appreciate all of you guys. We're going to be back. We're going to take a quick break and come back, and then we're going to talk about the matchups in the game, what he and I like to talk about. Landon and I are giant football nerds. He's actually giant and a football nerd. I'm just a very metaphorically large football nerd. We're talking about what's going to happen, what actually dictates the winning and losing coming up on the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Penn State Football Tailgate Show 2024. The Nittany Lions offensive line was what would happen behind starter Drew Shelton. Second-year lineman Javen Williams drew praise from head coach James Franklin this summer as having taken a step in the spring and maybe even opening the door for a competition with him and Shelton if he continued to progress. Then, as camp wore on, Williams found himself with the guards to end camp. However, on Wednesday, he was back at left tackle behind Shelton. Franklin then put speculation about his position to bed after practice.
Javen Williams switching position to guard. I don't remember saying that. I talk about Javen getting reps at guard to create flexibility like we do with all of our offensive linemen. So if I did say that, I apologize.
But Williams moving around the offensive line doesn't totally allay the concerns about the depth behind Shelton. Franklin also discussed the need to find answers at tackle behind the starting trio of Shelton, Nolan Rucci, and Anthony Donko a few weeks ago. Elsewhere on the offense, the tight end room also had some moving parts ahead of the game against West Virginia. Penn State freshman Luke Reynolds was with the starting quartet of tight ends, and according to Franklin, will have a big role on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you'll see a ton of Raplier. I also think you'll see a decent amount of Luke as well in this first game. I think Rapp, as you guys know, there's been an excitement about him since last year, and he just continues to develop and get better. I think Tyler's influence on all those guys has been really good, and Luke has come in exactly what you want and has pushed those guys too.
But on the flip side, veteran Khalil Dinkins hasn't been at practice for a few weeks and is likely out for the game based on Franklin's comments and context clues around the situation. But what does the offense look like? Franklin says that the team can use both running backs this year thanks to the depth and talent of the starting dynamic duo Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and the young players behind them.
But no, I think, being able to play some what we call 20 personnel, 2 backs, 0 tight ends, or 2 backs, 1 tight end. Maybe not a traditional 21 that people think with a tailback, a true fullback, a tight end, and 2 wide receivers. When 20 personnel is most effective, when they have to fear both of those backs as also blockers and also receivers. Katron has been really a good receiver since he got here. I think that's where Nick has improved as much as anything, is in his confidence and his ability to be a receiver. And Cam's always been a very, very natural wide receiver. So that's important for all those guys.
But what does the whole offense look like? We're going to find out together at noon. That's the Penn State practice update. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We'll be back with more of the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate Show next. Quarterback battle. Everyone wants to know the headliners. Drew Aller versus Garrett Green. Quarterback advantage. Ryan, who do you think has the advantage?
I gotta throw that to me first, man.
if
Drew
you
Aller
haven't
was
noticed,
really
it's
good
a,
against
it's
West
a
Virginia
snake
last year.
draft.
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Was that maybe his best game last year? I mean, you can. There's certainly some statistical games that I think were a little bit better, but like as far as your first true game as a starter, he had some really impressive throws in that game, and at the same time though, Garrett Green was phenomenal after going against Penn State. He wasn't even that bad against Penn State either. To me, I mean, I think if you're looking at last year's production and all that, you kind of lean towards Green a little bit. But like, look, I don't think there's a big discrepancy between them. I honestly don't. I don't have a whole lot more. I can sit here and talk about stats and all that. To me, it's a new season. There's a lot of different X factors that'll play into it, but I think it's more equal than not. Is that fair to say?
Fitz, is that fair?
Frank?
I think so. Whoever. I mean, do you get Drew that you got against West Virginia last year? Because that's a pretty good Drew. But at the same time, we got the other body of work that you're not as familiar with. The other thing here is Penn State's breaking in a new offense, quote unquote new offense. So that's going to probably have some wrinkles in it and probably have some growing pains that maybe end a drive here or there. So I don't know. I mean, Green, like, he's the better. I mean, no doubt Aller's the better pro prospect, but Green gets things done and is a very good college quarterback. Now, is he as good as he was down the stretch last year when he plays Penn State's defense? I don't know. That's a big X factor to me because I just think Penn State's defense is much, much better than West Virginia. So it's really interesting to see the comparison because I think everybody is like, hey, Garrett Green's going to do this, Garrett Green's going to do that. And I think he's capable of it. And everyone's like, there are so many things that Drew Aller can't do. And I'm not sure that's the case either. So it's going to extremes on both ends there. But I think that, they even out pretty well. Both I think are going to be as good as their running game. And I think Penn State's running game has potential to have a decent day on Saturday. So I think that's kind of what goes to. I mean, it's never just the one guy, right? Like that's kind of what we get into. We get into quarterbacks playing quarterbacks. They're never on the field at the same time. So that's that's kind of where I go back with that. But I think both of them are capable of getting the job done. So I don't have a strong opinion on this one.
I gave some of my thoughts yesterday. Actually, I gave pretty much all of my thoughts yesterday on the show, so I won't go into too many of those things too deep. But one of the things I've been looking at, and I think both guys have room for development. So Garrett Green could become a better quarterback this year. He could have worked on his accuracy and some of his decision-making, and Drew Aller could be a more confident player. So those are, from a growth perspective, for those two guys, I think that's the X factor for the quarterbacks is who's taken a step in their areas of development. And then, as you mentioned, Fitz, Andy Kotelnicki is a big part of this game as well, and how he can help Aller with some of those things that come down to decision-making and maybe taking some of the things off his plate, giving him some easier throws. Because Garrett Green, if you're comparing the two, Garrett Green was in this style of offense.
View of today's game, here's Landon Tengwall as he gives you the key matchups. Brought to you by Stalker Chevrolet. For your next vehicle purchase, come to Stalker Chevrolet and save with low interest rates. And remember, only at Stalker Chevrolet will you get the Stalker Advantage with the purchase of any new vehicle.
So I'm going to get into my key matchup in today's game, and it is the Penn State front seven versus Garrett Green's legs. Now, we all know that the West Virginia rushing attack is pretty much the best in all of Power 5 football. But I think my biggest thing here is making sure that Garrett Green does not get going. He rushed for over 100 yards in 3 games last year. And here are some main things. I think Abdul Carter, he loves to rush upfield and really bend that edge.
Yeah.
Now, what that does when he does that, it opens up kind of a pocket, like a little gap for Garrett Green to then take off. So Abdul Carter needs to keep contained. He needs to be careful of not overrunning that arc and allowing Garrett Green to step up, roll out to his right, and get going that way. The other side of it, Tony Rojas and maybe Abdul Carter might bounce around a little bit, but Tony Rojas needs to be ready to track this dude down. That I feel like that's going to be kind of his responsibility. We've heard Tom Allen say that Abdul Carter won't strictly play defensive end. There is some possibility of him bouncing around at linebacker. So, maybe there's a little bit of Abdul Carter spying Garrett Green, but I would say Tony Rojas needs to be ready to track him down. Do not let Garrett Green beat you with his legs today.
Something I saw when watching Tom Allen's defense, and it can be completely different because he's got more talent and different ability players in the front seven. But the Will linebacker, number 44 for Indiana, you saw that guy, Micah McFadden, Aaron Casey over the years. They use that player exactly how you described in a lot of games, including against a game against Wisconsin last year, and a quarterback with a similar skill set to Garrett Green, not nearly as good of a football player, but a similar skill set. So you and I are on the same wavelength about that. When it comes to rushing up the field and those rush lanes, something they did last year was they did a lot with former defensive coordinator Manny Diaz, was they did a lot of twists where they would bring one guy inside and then bring another guy outside. It felt like they were trying to kind of shepherd him out of the pocket in the way they wanted him to get him to the spot to have a guy in his face when he breaks the pocket. Do you think that's also something they can do this year? And is that something when you do something once and it's on film against the team, can you go back to that well?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you can. If that's your bread and butter, and that's something you've been practicing, you can do that. And, that is something that for an offensive lineman, now we're going against a very veteran group up front for West Virginia. They lost Zach Frazier. He got drafted by the Steelers, who I think was the best center in all of college football last year. So as much as their offensive line takes a little bit of a step back, they are still extremely veteran. From right tackle to left tackle, they go fifth year, then fourth year. It's that is very veteran. That is a little bit different than our offensive line. So yes, I do think we can get after them with those stunts and those twists. But at the same time, it's going to be we need to get after Garrett Green, make him feel uncomfortable. But like I said, you need to be careful blitzing. You need to be careful rushing upfield because he can make you pay the other way. So I'm excited to see what Tom Allen's going to come with. And then on that third down packages, we haven't we pretty much know that 7-up look is coming again for third down, where we are really confusing the quarterback, confusing the offensive line. It can look like we're bringing 7 guys, and then next thing you know, we drop 8 guys into coverage. That is how I want to kind of mess with Garrett Green's head today. And then, like I said, let Abdul Carter, let Tony Rojas, those third downs specifically, do not let Garrett Green extend drives. When you get to 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, it's a killer when you let a quarterback convert those, but especially convert those with his legs. You got to get off the field on 3rd down. That is really where we need to keep an eye on Garrett Green's legs for this Penn State defense.
Snaps last season for the West Virginia offensive line for the returning players. Brandon Yates, 795. Wyatt Milam, 754. Thomas Rimmick, 690. That's the starting left side of the offensive line. And then you go down to Jaquay Hubbard, 432. We expect him to be filling into that role at right guard. That's a similar number of snaps to Drew Shelton, who's now stepping into that left tackle position, and Penn State fans feel like they know who that is with Drew Shelton. And then Nick Malone, 418 snaps. So even though those two guys were not starters last year, West Virginia does a great job, like Penn State, of making sure these guys are ready to go when they get into the game, when their time is up, or when their time has come and they're ready to be the starter. So there is not this massive question mark and drop off into the next player. So that's going to be something to watch. We're going to get back to that in just a second, but I want to continue our conversation about the Penn State offense. And we talked about expectations. We talked a little bit about the scheme in this game, but I want to get down into it. And I want to talk about your guys up front, the offensive line. It's a veteran defensive line for West Virginia. Just like on the offensive line, 4 of their defensive linemen, and I'm going to count their spear position and the player at that position as a defensive lineman because he's 255 pounds. So those 4 guys, 2 of them are returning starters, and 2 of them, again, played significant snaps last year. Penn State, as much as we talk about Drew Shelton, we feel like we know who he is. This is his first time filling in the starting role for Olu Fashanu. And then on the right side, 2 offensive linemen with a combined 150 snaps together in their college career, and then Nick Dawkins filling in at center. How do you see that matchup going, and what are the pain points for Penn State?
Yeah, so we'll start off with the kind of the easier one. Nick Dawkins filling in at center for Hunter Norzad. Now, Hunter Norzad was a 6th-year guy, probably the most veteran guy. And when I say that, I mean he acted like an NFL vet in a college locker room. Yeah. So losing that definitely hurts, but I think Nick Dawkins is able to plug in really nicely. I don't think he's as good as Hunter Norzad and as athletic, but that's someone who is, he's a captain. He is Penn State football as a whole. If you know him, you know what Nick Dawkins is about. He's going to lead that offensive line, and he's going to do his job. Now, looking over at left tackle, Drew Shelton. Olu Fashanu 2022 got hurt against Ohio State, was out for the rest of the year. Drew Shelton finished off those last 5 games at left tackle as a true freshman and really didn't do that bad. I think only let up maybe 1 or 2 sacks max. And it was like there wasn't that much of a drop-off. We won the Rose Bowl. There wasn't a lot of pressure in that game. So people really high on Drew Shelton coming into that next year. Didn't get to play a ton with Caden and Olu coming back. And now you played a lot in the Peach Bowl and kind of struggled a little bit. I'm not going to lie. We looked at that in Drew Aller's film breakdown. There was a touchdown pass to Tyler Warren that would have been easy. Drew Shelton's protection kind of broke down, and he let his defensive end beat him and then kind of get to Drew Aller within about 2 seconds. That is something I'm a little bit worried about with Drew Shelton is he leans, he opens up a lot. So now, Drew Aller goes from having someone in Olu Fashanu where, no matter, like my blind side is protected. I don't have to worry about it. I got 5-6 seconds on my blind side. Every once in a while, he's a very good player, but every once in a while, Drew Shelton can have that quick where I get beat in a second or a second and a half.
Those are devastating too.
Yeah, and those are drive killers, are game killers. Yep. So that is something I want to keep an eye on, especially in a place where I don't know if we're going to go silent count or not. If you've ever seen the offensive linemen have to go silent count, we did that against Iowa in 2021. I'm bringing up some bad memories today on this Blue White Illustrated pregame show, but that can be detrimental to a team when you start to have to go silent count. It's really loud in the stadium. So I'm definitely keep an eye on Drew Shelton in the pass game. Now, moving over to right tackle, we got Anthony Donka and Nolan Rucci, and Franklin came out and said they are basically going to be splitting reps. And I can talk about this firsthand, splitting reps for Penn State football. I did that with Hunter Norzad in 2022 at left guard. It's not easy. You do not get a really good feel for that defensive lineman and what they're trying to do. And the defense as a whole, the schemes they're trying to run, because you'll play 2 drives and then you'll miss 2 drives. Right. It's really hard to get into a rhythm.
It's hard to pick up on what they're doing and then apply it to the next rep is what you're saying.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And translating that when you go to the sideline with Coach Trout, hey, now we have the tablets. Before we just had a whiteboard we can write on. Now you're looking at the tablets. So that does make it a little bit easier. We now have communication in the middle linebacker and the quarterback's helmet and then tablets on the sideline like they do in the NFL. So that does help with that. But you're not in there. You're not feeling it and you're getting yanked. And then there's also the piece of it is like I'm worried. I'm looking over my shoulder the entire time. Hey, if I mess up, I'm getting yanked for the other guy. If I give up a sack, I'm done for today. I'm getting yanked. So there is that piece of it too. Now, I think both players are pretty good. They both Anthony Donka in the Peach Bowl was really good. Caden Wallace played for about a quarter, and then Anthony Donka came in and didn't really notice too much of a drop off from Anthony Donka.
There was some stuff there from a run game perspective where he was rolling dudes.
He was rolling. He was like unsure and rolling dudes. He's like looking around like he's going to miss the assignment, and then he pancakes someone on the same play. I mean, he is someone that has a lot of potential. Now he was a little banged up, did not get to play in the spring game, and I know some of that has been lingering into the season, but he is good to go at right tackle. It seems like Anthony Donka will probably start out the game, and then Nolan Rucci will then switch with him. But that is something to keep an eye on when you are constantly switching a lineman. It's kind of hard to really get that run game, pass game going. Yeah. So that's something I'd be weary of if I'm Coach Trout and Coach Franklin.
I think that getting the run game going is really important to the passing game within this offense, and this is something, Landon, that I think There's this old school thought that you have to run the ball to a concussive degree to then set up the pass. Run to set up the pass, literally, like I've got to run the ball 8 times for my play action to work. You have to, from what I've seen, you have to present a credible threat that you can run the football. And with Nick Singleton on the field, there's always, and Katron Allen, there's always a credible threat that you can run the football. But when it comes to the blocking up front, I think that's the part where it's the real threat for the defense is if that front 5, if they gel and they get going and some of these things that they can overcome, what you talked about, some of those both self-inflicted and maybe some potential weak points, they can get through that. I think that Penn State's got an opportunity to generate those explosive plays in the passing game. But let's talk about that passing game because that's what everyone wants to know about with this particular team. How are they going to be able to bounce back from that season last year where the big play didn't happen? So this linebacker safety matchup with West Virginia, what do you see being an advantage for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat of an unproven group. They got a guy coming back from major injury, a couple guys that haven't really played a ton. And I think, this offensive line, we just thought when they need to get going, they need to get those double teams up to the linebackers and allow Nick and Katron to have holes to run through. Now, Katron Allen is going to find the hole. He has some of the best vision I have seen in a long time. I saw Le'Veon Bell highlights, and I said, wow, hold on, that actually looks a lot like Katron Allen.
That's a good comp.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great comp.
I have that actually in my tweet drafts, my Twitter drafts right now. So nobody steal that from me because I have a video side by side. But they are eerily similar when it comes to their patience and their vision to hit a hole. So I think even with a young offensive line that isn't able to block it up as good as last year, that is still someone that can, really get you something going. Now, I think the biggest thing is, and we talked about Andy Kotelnicki getting his guys with the ball in space. Nick Singleton is more athletic than these linebackers. They don't have a linebacker where they don't have a Tony Rojas, they don't have an Abdul Carter, nothing like that.
They're all young too, all sophomore or lower.
Exactly, it's a pretty unproven group. If you follow me at all this week, I kind of called them out a little bit, saying that this is one of the worst linebacking corps we'll face. But I really do believe it's one of the most unproven as far as good teams we will play this entire year. And you take advantage of that in the run game. I mean, that's how you started out. You have to impose your will and make them make them start to creep up a little bit, make them creep into the box. Now you take it over the top. And we have a couple matchups there. I don't think anybody on this team can guard Tyler Warren. That is something he's someone that has been Drew Aller's safety blanket for a while, and I think he's going to continue to be that. Him coming back and not going to the draft last year was huge for this Penn State offense, because you went from basically, if he would have left, you don't really have a proven wide receiver. I mean, you really don't. Now he comes back, it's like, okay, if I'm Drew, I got Tyler. I know he can bail me out at a certain point if I need it. But kind of looking at the wide receivers, if you're ready to get into this, I mean, Trey Wallace, it's go time. He was injured a lot last year. West Virginia last year, week 1, 7 receptions, 72 yards. These cornerbacks are not good. I know we'll get a little bit deeper into the West Virginia defense, but Trey Wallace, I mean, there's an opportunity here for him to have a little bit of a coming out party. Now, like we said, I want to keep this ball on the ground. It's going to be a little rainy. It's going to be iffy. You're going to be in a really loud stadium, so I would be very mindful of dropping back a lot. Like I said, putting your offensive linemen in positions where they have to block for long periods of time, and maybe they're getting off the ball slow because it's so loud in the stadium. So there's that piece of it. But Trey Wallace has the opportunity against some pretty lackluster cornerbacks that he can put up a similar game where he had 7 to 10 receptions. Like, I could see that for Trey Wallace in this game. And then there's a couple other wide receivers. We've heard a lot about Liam Clifford throughout camp, and he's someone that's kind of just always open, finds his way into the right spots. So I think if he can just be a reliable guy for Drew, where he's open and he's going to catch the ball if Drew puts it on him, that's also really good for Drew to kind of continue to take that next step. But Drew just needs to be helped out. He needs guys that will go make plays for him. If he puts it on the money, you got to catch it. There's a couple of times where we really just, in the Peach Bowl, in the Michigan game, where it was just like, man, Drew Aller does not have any help out here. We weren't really able to run the ball in either big game last year, Ohio State or Michigan. So I think there's definitely a couple factors going in this game, but I think the biggest thing is being able to establish the run early against what I think really is a weak front seven for West Virginia.
Earlier this week, I scouted the entire West Virginia defense from front to back. The defensive line, I think, were a little bit underperforming last year in terms of their size and their talent perspective. Sean Martin, we went back and forth on, is he healthy? Is he not healthy? Is he good? Is he not good? He's got to prove that this year against this particular offensive line with some question marks, and vice versa. It's a good first test for the Nittany Lions, who are not going to face an elite edge rusher in this group, because West Virginia, what they do more simulated pressures, more 4-man guys with blitzes from the secondary. Trey Lathan is the linebacker I'm looking for in terms of a guy who can step in for Lee Koba. He was a good coverage player. He was a good blitzer last year, just a young guy, only played in 5 games. We'll see how those linebackers do, because I think it's a significant advantage for Penn State, like you said, in that situation. The secondary, as much as I like Tom Allen's defense, I do not like this West Virginia scheme. Last year, and this is, again, something I wrote about, they're moving Aubrey Burks down to their lion position, the slot corner position. I don't know that he performed well or had the instincts to play in the box last year. He was pretty okay. He's got good coverage ability as a slot safety sort of situation. But his run defense in a team that wants to bring extra players to the point of attack, not necessarily have the size at the linebacker position. All these guys are 235 or under. Most of them are in like 225. You need to bring bodies, and he was a guy that overran gaps, didn't understand his gap responsibility last year. He could have gotten better, but that's a question mark and something that maybe Penn State can take advantage of. And then they just drop 8 all the time. I can't stand drop 8. They rush 3 players, they drop 8 into coverage, they have these Big 12 spaghetti defenses that make no sense when you look at them from a structure standpoint. But as long as you can identify where the safeties are, you can find where to throw the football. The extra defender is more just to kind of confuse the quarterback, but not in a meaningful way. I don't know, because you're not putting any pressure on him up front. A couple things I want to clean up before we get into the defense, because we do have to move on here on the Penn State Tailgate Show. You mentioned the weather, 85 degrees. The humidity is going to be 80%. It's going to be a good one out there. Weather Channel or weather.com says severe storm risk. There are possible risk of severe weather today. Wind and hail are possible.
Wow.
But the wind is the greatest threat, so we're going to see a lot of different stuff being thrown at the Penn State offense this year, not just from the defense, but also from Mother Nature. Some of the questions here in the BWI live chat that I want to get to. Blizzard Warning says, a great team, T. Frank and Landon. Here's to a great season. Appreciate you. All the regulars are popping up, including KJ Johnson, who says, is this new scheme more lineman friendly? Will it help the young group out to start the season? I think that's true. Block angles are easier when guys aren't in the gap they're supposed to be on the defensive side. I also talked to Javen Williams during media day. He said that they've changed some things from the responsibility of the lineman perspective that will allow them to play faster. They have to do a little less reading and a little more attacking. And as somebody who likes to run, I know Landon loves his athleticism, Javen Williams' athleticism. If he's able to just run, that could be good for this front five.
It absolutely can be. When you take the complicity out of the playbook, and especially on the offensive line, where you will have to react in 0.5 seconds, but you have to react physically. You know, it's not a wide receiver or DB where you have to make a cut and react. You got to react and then mash into another 300-pound man. If you take some of that thought out of it, especially for a younger group of offensive linemen that, you know, we have some starting experience, but a lot of these guys don't have a ton of experience playing, that is really helpful. And then on top of that, I think also having Nick Dawkins leading at that center position.
Yeah.
You know, people have talked about, hey, is Cooper going to get in? Is Cooper going to start at center? I don't think so for a little bit. And
he's been playing right guard during camp and pretty much since spring ball.
Yeah, I think he'll see most of his play at guard or center if it's a blowout game against a Bowling Green. I just don't see any way that Cooper Cousins overtakes Nick Dawkins, because there is so much responsibility on the center to direct the guys, to change.
I thought that was crazy. I'm sorry.
That was never. I'm just going to be honest, guys. That's not going to happen.
When we were talking about that, I'm like, that's crazy.
It's not going to. Cooper Cousins will not overtake Nick Dawkins at center of the season.
A freshman playing center seemed insane for as much as, especially with James Franklin, and I think the conservative nature in which he is, like he operates of, we don't want to take unnecessary risks. Having a true freshman, listen, football is hard. It's not just physically hard, and Cooper has that part down, I think. It's the of football. If you don't, as you just mentioned, if you can't react in 0.5 seconds and know what you're doing. And it's this is not slander to Cooper Cousins. Oh. It takes time to learn the nuances of football. To play a freshman and to have him start at center, especially out of the gate, always seemed like this is an unrealistic expectation.
I think so. And like you said, Cooper Cousins, I think he will end up being one of the highest drafted guys since Olu. Let me just put that out there eventually. But like you said, it's just there's no way that you're trusting a center going into, because centers just, we talked about reacting in 0.5 seconds. Who do you want to do that? A fifth-year guy in Nick Dawkins who's been in this offense for a while and knows everything, or Cooper Cousins who just got here and he's going to MA? MA means missed assignment. When you're a freshman, missed assignments are a pretty much guarantee. When you have a fifth-year guy you can rely on, those are very few and far between. So I look for Nick Dawkins to continue to kind of help out this young offensive line moving forward.
Landon and I are podcast guys, so our missed assignment is always going to be the clock. So we're going to come back with our next segment. We're going to be talking about the Penn State defense, the new look for people who are joining us just now. We have a ton of people on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We have our highest live audience of the season so far. I love that. If you're here, like the video, consider subscribing to Blue White Illustrated. If you haven't yet, we've got a lot of great coverage coming up today, including our post-game show, and of course, subscribe to the site. But right now, what's going to be in your face? It's going to be the Coach's Corner coming up next.
Right. That's why we've set aside the most important stuff for you.
It's Coach's Corner, powered by Your Cigar Den and Monte Cristo Lounge, with free, easy in and out parking for all your tailgating needs. Check out Your Cigar Den's new Casa Cuban Lounge on Colonnade Boulevard next to Wegmans.
It was another summer of change in Happy Valley with head coach James Franklin. The roster transitions between NFL departees, transfer newcomers, and new coordinators was only the tip of the iceberg. New NCAA rules allow coaches to be in specific players' helmets to talk to them until there are 15 seconds left on the play clock. And Franklin feels pretty good about how Penn State will adapt.
The more times we do it, the better we're at it. We've been doing it at practice, even without the DV Sport people here. And that's been good. It's not the same as obviously when DV Sports here and they're cutting the mics off after 15 seconds left on the clock, those types of things. So there's things that you got to get worked through it.
A major offseason headline was the transfer portal addition of former Ohio State wide receiver Julian Fleming. The State College newcomer caught 79 passes for 963 yards and 7 touchdowns in his Columbus career. Coach Franklin seems to think being a Nittany Lion rather than a Buckeye has been a positive shift for the star wideout.
He understands football. He's got a tremendous football IQ. He's a big, strong, physical, tough guy who we think is going to make the tough catches for us. Has been throughout his career a very physical blocker, also a very good special teams player. And I just think he's one of these guys, again, as a veteran, older player, he's very intentional about what he has to do to be successful and how he practices and how he approached his offseason.
Penn State is down in Morgantown for their matchup with the West Virginia Mountaineers. WVU came in Week 1 to Beaver Stadium 1 year ago and got throttled 38-15. Upwards of 60,000 fans are packing out Mountaineer Field, just a few thousand shy of the 100,000 plus Beaver capacity. 60,000 is nothing to scoff at, though. Coach and co are preparing for the wild journey down country roads.
Home field advantage is a real thing. I think that's number one. I think number two, when you talk about the specifics of a home field advantage, it's the noise in the stadium, but you can replicate that a little bit. It's players that are playing for Penn State for the first time. How are they going to handle that?
James Franklin is solely focusing on guiding the Nittany Lions to 1-0, even while he gets called out by some former Mountaineers. Host and former West Virginia punter Pat McAfee has raved over the last week plus about his college team rolling over Penn State in West Virginia. Coach made sure to reiterate that his former players can have as much fun in the media as Pat does, but the current ones, not so much.
I think it's very similar to the old billboard material. I want to make sure that our guys don't say anything and our staff doesn't say anything that creates billboard material, because for some people that motivates them, right? And I want to make sure that I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth with our staff and our players, because I also strongly recommend our players getting off of social media, especially in season, which is easier said than done.
We'll be back with more of the Penn State Tailgate Show right after this.
This game,
I think it's the defensive line. Unquestionably, in my mind, the best unit on the field. Like that's, I think there's obviously depth, talent, speed, all that kind of stuff. A lot of it goes to Penn State. West Virginia's lost a couple of really good offensive linemen. They're going to replace them, but they have experience up front. So, I don't think it'll be a catastrophic drop off or anything like that, but also Penn State has experience. They've got grown men up front. So I think that is a situation where they can really, maybe West Virginia hits a couple runs early, but like buckle down and stop the run and make Garrett Green beat you. He's certainly capable of doing that, especially with his feet. But it's a situation where I think you keep him in front of you. You don't let him, slide back in those little pockets that he found last year. He had 71 rushing yards last year. And a stat that really surprised me. So just 2 sacks last year. There was 3 sacks total. The one was one of the worst 4th down calls I've ever seen with the backup in there. But Garrett Green took 2 sacks for 6 yards. So 3 yards a sack. That is really good in the sense, like, if you have to take a sack, get close to the line of scrimmage, keep yourself as close to on schedule as you can. This is a smart quarterback. He does some really good things on the run. So excited to watch him play, but I think Penn State's defensive line is really, if you're ranking units by from team to team, I think Penn State's defensive line is the one that can dictate this game.
Ryan, what's your X factor in this game?
That was the same thing I wrote. So that's why I was joking. Like, oh, what am I going to talk about now? To me, it's the interior too, if you want to get specific. I mean, I think Abdul and Denai will get theirs to some degree. Obviously, one of them will be going up against Wyatt Malone, great tackle, the guy that Penn State recruited. But to me, like Devon J. Thomas and obviously Hakeem Beamon, all those guys, Kazai Izzard, like They were solid last year. Can they take that next step? Because Jaheim White's a good running back, like a guy that I'm not saying.
Yeah,
I'm not saying, if Penn State could do it all over again, they would have recruited him harder, because obviously they recruit on a very good running back level. That's not everyone understands that. But
you swap it out for London Montgomery, nobody's complaining here.
Right. Yeah. Good point. He's a quality player. So obviously being able to dictate the interior there and be able to keep them contained to some degree, I think that's really what stands out to me. And then also at the same time, Penn State's offensive line too, right? I mean, what all happens there? Because West Virginia brings back a few quality guys, but are they on? They're not, to me, like their defensive line isn't what you see at Ohio State and Michigan. I do think that if you look like statistically and stuff, there's a lot of stats that line up pretty good there for West Virginia. But at the same time, this group has been tested against what I believe is better opponents or better talent from that perspective. But definitely the trenches, man. I mean, you go both ways. I know that's the easy cop-out way. Like, you could say that about every game, but to me, certainly that stands out in this one.
Fitz, I wanted to bring up an additional point to your Garrett Green comment about only giving up 2 sacks for a minimal amount of yardage. 15 pressures.
Now, back to the Penn State Football Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships.
This is the Penn State Football Tailgate Show, powered by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships, celebrating more than 40 years of service to the community. Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships has a vehicle to fit your budget and transportation needs. Home of the $1,000 lowest price guarantee with 20 locations throughout Pennsylvania. You should check them out. I recently had to do some work with their body shop because somebody went through an intersection in front of me in June. They're awesome guys. I've spent Blaze Alexander Mazda. I want to give a shout out to the body shop. They were awesome and super helpful throughout the whole process. So we have believers here in the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships. Not just that I have to read the card, but I also am a customer. Landon, let's talk about the Penn State defense. Again, for Penn State fans, this is linebacker U. This is the Paul Posluszny, LeVar Arrington, Penn State Nittany Lions, and they're taking a linebacker off the field. Let's talk about the 4-2 defense. Tell fans about what they need to know about why, and I'm going to editorialize here, why this is a good thing.
Yeah. So the reason why we are going to be running this 4-2 defense instead of the basic 4-3 that we normally run is because of Zakee Wheatley. Last year, we had Jalen Reed and we had KJ Winston on the field, and it was like, man, yeah, that's really good. That's probably one of the best safety groups in all of college football. But Zakee Wheatley was on the bench for a lot of snaps last year, and that's someone who I think could start at majority of schools. And I think there was a little bit of that threat. Number one, Zakee leaving if he wasn't going to start. But now it's like, hey, Jalen Reed can come and play that nickel cornerback, kind of that normal Sam position role, where now we can get all 3 safeties on the field at once. And Tom Allen said when he came in, that was a big emphasis, finding a way to get all of them on the field at once. And, as much as Kobe King and Tony Rojas, that's some elite linebackers, Dom DeLuca is obviously a very good player, but athletically, he's not Tony Rojas or Abdul Carter or anything like that. So it was, hey, how can we make this how can we make our defense a little bit better? And I think that answer was getting all 3 safeties on the field at once, because they do stuff so differently and so well. I mean, Zakee Wheatley is that turnover machine. So number one, to not have a guy on when Coach Franklin's biggest emphasis, and I can tell you this, is winning the turnover battle. And you put someone that's just the ball just magically gets into his hands, it feels like.
He's nuts.
He just has a knack. It was like that in practice. It was always like that in games. It was like that when I played him in high school.
I was going to say, you guys go way back.
I go very far back with Zakee Wheatley. I go to his dad's house for barbecue quite often. So shout out my man Zakee Wheatley Sr.
Yeah, but he and I are Twitter friends, by the way.
Great guy. If you're on Twitter, follow Zakee Wheatley Sr. He gives out some great takes. But that is the biggest reason why we made that switch to 4-2-5. Now, what I will say about that is, when you play a team that's going to run the ball a lot, a.k.a. West Virginia, they led Power 5 in rushing last year. I believe they were averaging somewhere 228 on the ground. That's a lot of yards. That's a lot of yards per game. Now, my thing is, be careful in that 4-2-5. Maybe Dom DeLuca plays a little bit more today than he will in other games. I think outside of Ohio State, this is the best rushing attack we will see. Now, it's like, how often do you want Jalen Reed down near the line of scrimmage, now down near the ball? Jalen Reed and Dom DeLuca, they're a little bit different body types. Dom can stop that run a little bit better than Jalen Reed
He's
can.
Up to 230 now. He's worked on getting bigger, and he's going to play that box linebacker role when he's not out in the field. So just as a quick, the way I've always described it is you have 10 set defensive players where you have 4 defensive linemen in a 4-down front, 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 2 safeties, 2 corners, and then you have an 11th defender. And how you slice that pie is the determination of what your defense is. And this is just this defense is more of a lean towards something they were already doing when they brought Daquan Hardy on the field. I don't think people realize that Daquan Hardy and Curtis Jacobs played the same position last year. It's just who's playing in the slot and when are you playing them. My question is, let's talk about the defensive line. You've got 270, 260, 266, 292. Your 4 defensive ends, that's how much they weigh. Now, some of those guys are as big as the defensive tackles. I tried to ask them, hey, do you think you can control the game with 4? Do you think, instead of having to add in a 5th guy down on the line of scrimmage or bring an extra guy in the box, can you control this game with 4? Of course, nobody wanted to answer that question. But, Landon, do you think they can control the game with 4 and they can allow Jalen Reed to play in the game more often because there isn't as much of a threat of getting that guy to the second level, that guard getting to the second level like Landon Tengwall, getting up on a guy like Jalen Reed?
Yeah, first off, I got to say, when T. Frank just listed off our defensive end, their weights, he did not look at any piece of paper. I just want to put that out there. That was straight off of the dome, which is quite impressive. But I do think they can. I think this is probably the most veteran our defensive line group has been in a while, especially defensive tackle, but at defensive end as well. The short answer to that is yes, but I think, like I said, you need to be wary of this rushing attack. We talked about the West Virginia offensive line. They are veteran. They aren't as good as last year. There is that kind of that piece of it that, they are maybe still the best rushing attack, but I don't know if they will be the same without Zach Frazier. I really feel like that center is the reason they were able to pop a lot of those wide zones. People don't realize how important that center is on the wide zone because he's kind of the reason why you're able to reach that first defensive tackle and really get the play going. That's what gets the play going when you get that push on the play side defensive tackle.
Quickly, just to explain what reach means for people who don't know what that, because this is something that is going to apply to Penn State as well. They do the same and similar things. They tried last year with a guy like Hunter Norzad, who's so athletic. And this is Andy Kotelnicki's all about these stretch plays that spread the defense out. So what is a reach block?
So the reach block for, let's talk about the center. We're running to the right, and he has a defensive tackle to the right of him. He basically has to get all the way to the outside of that defensive tackle and almost seal him off. We're trying to get outside. He needs to reach all the way around, get his hat on the outside of that defender, and then drive him up the field. It sounds kind of easy, but it's not very easy when you're moving laterally and trying to push a guy vertical. With someone, like I said, with Zach Frazier was the best center in college football, it was a lot easier for West Virginia to get going in that run game, especially getting outside. Take away Zach Frazier, like I said, still very veteran offensive line, but I don't think they will be as good. So I do think the defensive line can handle these guys up front. But at the same time, like I said, I would be a little bit wary. I think Dom DeLuca is going to play a little bit more today than we will see in other games just because this rushing attack is so they're just adamant about running the ball at West Virginia.
We talked about Garrett Green, the runner, the scrambler. What about Garrett Green, the quarterback, and the Penn State defensive secondary? We talked about the safeties, the cornerbacks as we round here on the final about 60 seconds here in this segment talking about the corners. What do you see from this group matching up with West Virginia receivers?
Yeah, Coach Franklin said he's got like 4 or 5 corners. Excuse me, like 5 or 6 corners. I think he said that he thinks could start. So that is good. I don't think there's going to be as much of a drop off as we thought when we were losing Johnny Dixon, Kalen King, and our boy Daquan Hardy. It was like, oh man, that's going to be a position of need. Maybe not as much. And I will tell you, Garrett Green struggled as a passer last year. 53% completion rate is abysmal. Drew Aller had like 59, and we even said that was pretty bad. So 53 is not good. Now, it was said by the coaches at West Virginia that he had a 10% bump in his completion rate from last fall camp to this fall camp. That's what the coaches say. We don't get to see any of that. Let's see if it translates. But up to this point, Garrett Green has been a pretty bad passer and someone that is a one-read quarterback, meaning he has a read that he is told for that play. If it's not open, he's going to take off and run. So I'm excited to see Penn State force him to pass the ball.
Yeah, take away that first read, and we'll see if what he's able to do and where he's progressed. One of those things, though, the completion percentage wasn't good, but it was an aggressive passing attack down the field. He did lead all of quarterbacks last year in PFF's big-time throw rate. So when he was throwing some bombs down the field. It's a Big 12 defense, though, for the most part, that he was making those plays against. So we'll see what it is against this Penn State secondary that's very, very good.
I got to give a shout out to my man AG Duke 335. He said it's going to come down for one thing: shin angles. If you've been following me and T Frank, you know about shin angles. If you're a real fan,
Duke is a regular. Duke,
I love Duke. Shout out Duke.
So we're going to come back here and we're going to talk a little bit more about this game and get to our predictions in just a little bit. We're coming. I can't believe it. Coming in the last 15 minutes of the Penn State Tailgate Show here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel and 99.5 The Bus. Right now, it's This Week in Penn State Sports.
Football at Penn State. Tailgate Show right after this.
Do some maybe regional recruiting. Ryan, I think you wrote this earlier this week of some tracking players that Penn State's interested in that are going to be at the game. So let's just go through that and your opinion of how this can all work out for the Nittany Lions.
Well, to start, obviously Penn State cannot communicate with these guys when they are the road opponent. But when two schools are less than 200 miles apart and you are constantly kind of recruiting similar players, Penn State's kind of recruit a little bit on a higher level than West Virginia over the years, but obviously the Mountaineers are going to go after similar guys. There will be plenty of crossover between who Penn State's really targeting in 2026, even 2027. My article, I just kind of focused on 2026 just because it's what we're going to be really focusing on this fall. But there are, I think, 6, 7, 8 guys that really I think Penn State is seriously considering. There's more if you look at really who all they've offered. There's probably closer to a dozen or so. But when you really narrow it down, look at who's been visiting, look at who they've been visiting on the road and really pressing hard for. I thought there were about 7 or 8 guys that I think are intriguing. To just keep an eye on here. I'll run through a couple of them real quick. Travis Johnson, wide receiver out of Virginia. He has strong ties to West Virginia. His dad played for the Mountaineers. I believe it was 2000 to 2003. And his brother is currently on the roster. TJ Johnson, he's a redshirt freshman wide receiver, I want to say. Look, Penn State obviously has 2 wide receivers committed already. There's a big net obviously cast there. But right now I would have Travis as one of those top 5, 6, 7 guys that they're really seriously considering and going to push hard for. I think we break down the 26 receiver board last week? I think we did in the podcast.
August 20th, I believe it was.
Yeah, so that would have been somewhere last week. But so I think if you guys watched our show last week, we did hit on Travis and kind of where he stands on the board. And, look, 6'2", 175, certainly got to add some weight and size, but it was certainly an impressive route runner when I got to watch him in Baltimore down at the Under Armour camp in May. So he's going to be a guy I think that they are seriously considering. And like I said, strong ties to West Virginia, but he's actually visited Penn State, I believe, 4 times so far. Last visit was the blue-white game. So keep an eye on him moving forward. I think Carter Scruggs, offensive lineman, another player out of Virginia. is another player to really kind of focus on. I would have him as is it fair to say he's one of Phil's top interior lineman prospects, do you think, Sean?
It's so early for interior linemen in 2026 in terms of their development right now. Like, it's going to be a board that shakes itself out in the junior season, because it's not. He was at camp, and I don't think he was like crazy like at camp. So like there's a couple of those guys that, like Kevin Brown we talked about, that are no-brainers right now. But I think there's a big chunk of guys that he's going to evaluate in their junior season and see what's up. But Scruggs is certainly in that mix.
For sure.
Is that a kind of plateau thing?
Now, back to the Penn State Football Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships.
We were just talking about here in the break how quickly this 90-minute show goes. Normally, Landon and I, you do about an hour on your show, right?
Yep.
I do about an hour on my show. This 90-minute show has gone, it feels like we've been talking for about 5 minutes. There's so many things to talk about. Luckily, we got a segment here to talk about whatever we want in this game, this matchup. I picked some things. Landon's picked some things. Landon, you are our expert here, former football player. What do you want to talk about? What are you leading off this segment with?
All right, we talked about how a potent net West Virginia rushing attack is. I just want to give you this stat. Jaheim White, he averaged 7.7 yards per carry last year.
York, PA's finest.
Oh my God, that's a lot of yards per carry. I mean, I don't know if I've seen that stat line from really anybody. When I look at it, I was like, there's no way that's right.
Yeah.
So that is something to keep an eye on, where we talked about West Virginia being able to get outside in the run game, break off those explosive runs. That front seven needs to keep Jaheim White in check, and don't let him anywhere near that 7.7 yards per carry that he averaged last year.
And I am a huge fan, and this goes back to probably 2017, 18 sometime. I'm a huge fan of Tom Allen. I think what he does defensively, I talked about the spaghetti defense from Big 12 teams, where they try to obscure coverage and make the life hard on the quarterback by clogging it up with just numbers and chaos. It's more elegant with Tom Allen. What he does from a coverage rotation perspective, the things that he's able to do. I asked him, do you get joy from this? Like designing plays that are just ridiculous and crazy, and not ridiculous in like what I just described, not ridiculous in a bad way, ridiculous in terms of I didn't expect that. As somebody who enjoys these things too, I'm pleased when I see your middle linebacker suddenly in a deep half, or that wasn't even a middle linebacker, that was a safety, and suddenly you roll to a coverage that you weren't expecting. So from that perspective, I think Penn State has an advantage from an offensive perspective with their scheme. Neil Brown is a good coach, and I think their offensive scheme is very good. Andy Kotelnicki is on the same level in terms of the style of play and what I think they're able to do to help the players. I think it's a clear advantage with Tom Allen as the defensive coordinator. The mind and the talent together could produce something special to like what we saw with Manny Diaz.
Yeah, I don't think there could have been a better replacement for Manny Diaz than Tom Allen. You can't replicate what Manny Diaz meant to this team and these players. You saw anytime there was a turnover, they would run over, give him the ball. They loved him. It was like, father relationship for a lot of guys. You can't replace that. But this is about as damn close as you can get with Tom Allen, someone who said, hey, I'm ready to kind of take a step back from that head coaching role, play a role where, I'm still somewhat of a leader on a team, but I'm just a defensive coordinator. He is where he is supposed to be, and I don't think we could be in a better position after the way we ended last year heading into this year with Tom Allen leading this defense.
And I think the combination of the safeties, which we talked about earlier in terms of guys that can get their hands on the football. I remember watching Jalen Reed's high school highlight film and going, this dude's an animal. He was just around the football all the time. A lot of it, too, getting sacks, tackles for loss. And so he's kind of returning to a style of play that he's familiar to, like going all the way back into his roots. And I think that this is an interesting difference, though. I don't want to paint him as a linebacker, because if there's one thing that is a difference here between Manny Diaz and Tom Allen, and this could change with the talent up front, but Tom Allen has always been aggressive and unpredictable in the secondary and some of those things. Up front, Manny Diaz was creative and explosive the way he used his defensive linemen in front seven. But that linebacker role, this is truly a hybrid position where Jalen Reed's going to play at every level of the defense as opposed to just a linebacker, which is what Dom DeLuca was last year.
Yeah, if you want to have an idea how to think about Jalen Reed in your head, they're not at all similar in how they play. But Troy Polamalu was all over the place for that Steelers defense for so many years.
Yeah.
Kind of similar for Jalen Reed. Like I said, they don't play it all the same, but that is kind of how he's going to bounce around. He could be at the line of scrimmage. He can be 20 yards deep.
Yep.
He could be anywhere. So I'm excited to see how Tom Allen is going to utilize Jalen Reed.
And the nature of the defense, it's advantageous for all of the defensive secondary, the corners and the safeties. But if there's one group that does a lot and can show up where you're not expecting them and suddenly the ball's in their hands, it's the safeties. And you mentioned Zakee Wheatley, the ball magnet guy, who in 2021, I think it was his freshman season where he forced 2 turnovers in the first game against Purdue, I think it was. Or like the turnover king in the spring, turnover king in camp, got a bunch of turnovers, and then the maturation process of him to gamble less and be in the right position, I'm excited to see, because he came in with KJ Winston. And those two guys, I thought, they created a very balanced unit of KJ Winston, physical, explosive, fast, great run defender. Both these guys are big. They're both right around 200 pounds. They can tackle. That's an area where Wheatley, I think, needs to prove that this year. But these 3 players are complete players and can get their hands on the football. I think if all things go right, that could be something Penn State's able to do this season.
I do. I think that's KJ Winston's one of his best qualities, is making those tackles a lot around the line of scrimmage. We saw that a lot last year, just coming down and making those sure tackles. Like you said, Zakee Wheatley struggled a little bit with that. But when we put Zakee Wheatley on the field, like I mentioned, we have the opportunity to create a little bit more turnovers. Think back to Jair Brown. 2021 had 7 turnovers. 2022 had 6 turnovers. We missed that a little bit last year. Enter Zakee Wheatley, turnover machine. Let's see if he can get Drew Aller and company the ball a couple extra times this year.
I think that's an important part of this defense is... I don't want to say Manny Diaz wasn't trying to get the football, because that's ridiculous, but some of the things he would do were on third down, right? So Manny Diaz's defense on third down got very aggressive from a bunch of different perspectives. Tom Allen is doing some of these things on first down, where you are not expecting something so drastic when everyone's thinking run, and suddenly you're doing something in coverage that you're anticipating, just always trying to put the quarterback off his back foot from a mental perspective. From the offensive side of the ball, to me, with Drew Aller, this is a very important test game. And we started the show talking about Drew Aller. I want to end this conversation, or bring up here at the end of the show, his growth this offseason has to show up. And I've written about it all offseason. We've talked about it on the Blue White Illustrated live show all offseason. I know you've talked about it a bunch. It's all between the ears for Drew. If he can master that part of his game, it unlocks everything, because the special throws that we've seen on film, and check out Landon's channel, because he puts out all the All-22 film on his YouTube channel. I do it over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but he does a great job of showing you the coach's film and why some of those throws are special. I think Drew can still be that guy. I want to see it, though. And we always talk about, you say we, and because you played for the team, you're wearing the blue and white on your chest. I root for things I've never seen before. I want to see a franchise quarterback. I want to see somebody who is a generational, game-defining player. And I think Drew Aller has that in him. I would love to see that happen, because that would be super interesting. What that does for this team, what we see for Penn State, and what we see in the landscape of college football, that it's not the same names in the college football playoff every year. It's not going to be this year no matter what, but just see something different. And I'm excited to see that. And I think that with this particular matchup, we could see something like that with that West Virginia secondary, which is something we haven't brought up. They brought in, I think, 5 or 6 transfers again in the secondary. So great opportunity for them to do that out of the gate.
Yeah, they brought in 2 transfers. Those will be their starting cornerbacks from Northwestern, and then Duquesne, the Northwestern guy, is so-so. He was talking a little trash, saying Penn State only respects Michigan and Ohio State. And then that other cornerback from Duquesne is quite suspect. So there is.
He played in the slot. That's the thing, is like that he played at Duquesne and he played in the slot. Is he going to be their nickel corner, or is he going to play outside? Because that's a huge projection.
It is. It's a very different game in the slot versus playing outside. So, excited to see how that's going to fare. I think there's some opportunity for Drew Aller there. But as T. Frank said, it is about everything that's between the ears for Drew Aller today. He has all the intangibles. He has the ability to sling the rock. Now, can he be calm, cool, collected? We saw him make some really elite throws, but he would only really do that when the game was over, or whether they were going to lose Penn State or they were already up by a lot.
Yep.
When Drew Aller's under pressure, figuratively and literally, whether it's, by defensive linemen or in just a game that has a ton of pressure on it, he's kind of struggled. He talked about being a thermometer instead of a thermostat. So
yeah.
Excuse me, might have been the other way around.
Other way around.
Yes.
Yeah. I do that all the time.
I was thinking about it. I was like, so, registering the heat instead of just taking it.
Yep.
That's hard to just change. You can't just kind of flip that switch from a standpoint of, hey, now I'm just going to be this calm, cool, collected guy instead of being panicky. That is really hard to do as an athlete, but I am excited to see Drew Aller be able to take that next step. I think he has it in him, and Andy Kotelnicki is the guy to instill confidence in Drew Aller and this offense.
I think that's the one last point I want to make as we get out of here in this segment before we get to our predictions is Andy Kotelnicki is a force of nature as a human being. He talked about Nick Dawkins being one of those guys that's special, one of those guys that you just know when you see and you meet them that they have a magnetic personality. It takes one to know one. Andy Kotelnicki, having spoken to him a couple of times, he commands the room. He instills confidence, I think, in anyone who's around him, and that's a big part of this. I also want to say, Corey here in the chat, donating $50 to the channel. My guy, Corey, he says he couldn't arrive on time. I appreciate you, and he says the addition of Landon Tengwall cannot be understated. I have been tripping over excellent co-hosts on the show. Aeneas Hawkins was awesome last year. Landon Tengwall already off to a 1-0 start. We're going to come back with our predictions. Penn State football, West Virginia, coming up at noon. We're going to tell you what's going to happen next. You will and how West Virginia and this score is going to play out.
I went with 31-24, so I don't have them covering right around. So I'll be honest. I mean, whenever I pick these, it's really, I'm looking at the line, looking at the total, picking a number somewhere in that ballpark. To me, Nick Singleton, can Kotelnicki find a way to unlock Nick Singleton? That's the big thing. 2, Tyler Warren, man, he was very good in the red zone last year. Can he take advantage of a West Virginia linebacker core and even a secondary that's there's a lot of questions about right now? Keeping an eye on him down in the red zone. I think defensively Penn State will be fine. I don't really know what we're going to get with Kotelnicki's offense. You guys have been in practice a little bit more than me, but I don't think you've seen a whole lot. No one really does. But to me, Nick Singleton, unlocking him, not seeing that kind of sophomore slump that we saw last year, I have no doubt in my mind that has to be a big part of what Kotelnicki's been trying to stir up here over the last however many months, because he is a true game breaker that we did not see, as that game breaker that we expected to be last year. Katron's going to get those 4 or 5 yards. He's always going to fall forward and get that reliable rush that you need consistently. It's Singleton who needs to be the game breaker. I think you can get that against West Virginia, but at the same time, West Virginia did a very good job against Penn State's rush game, or for the most part, did a pretty good job against Penn State's rush game last year. So to me, Singleton, circle Tyler Warren. Can he be the red zone guy? I think he could be a pretty good threat down there. I think he was tied in the Big Ten for touchdowns last year in the red zone with 6 or 7. So can he build off of that? And obviously, what Drew Aller do we get, and what kind of a playbook do we get? There's so many factors there. I'll lean towards Penn State, but I do think it'll be a little bit closer than I think most Penn State fans would prefer.
Fitz, where are you going with this game?
The opposite. Push back on a couple things. Katron and Nick both averaged over 5 yards a carry last year against West Virginia. It's not a huge number, but it's a move the sticks type number. Mm-hmm. If they get to the second level and they make a guy miss, which was their big problem last year, obviously, they've got a chance. I don't know how this secondary is going to tackle. Like you look at, and I'm playing the portal game here where you go out and you find some guys and you don't know if the guy from Duquesne, maybe freaking stud, the guy from Northwestern, they might be really, really good. Beanie Bishop was obviously tremendous. You just don't know. And I'm curious to see, and you look at that tape from last year, even though it's a different offense, Penn State did manage to break to the second level, then they just didn't take it to the third. Is Andy Kotelnicki in a spot to get Nick Singleton that little bit of space where he doesn't have to rely on his vision as much as he has to rely on just getting away from the guy that he can clearly see? Like his vision.
Put the pedal down.
Yeah, put the pedal down and go. And I think that's very possible with Nick Singleton. And I think that you can do that as a runner. You can do that in motion, which
Now back to the Penn State Football Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships. It's time to lock it up.
You better lock it up. No, you lock it up. You lock it up.
Here's the expert predictions for today's game.
We're back here for the final segment here on the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate Show 2024. We're going to go through our predictions. Landon, lead us off. We're going to get into the predictions and then our keys of the game and how that is going to play out. So what do you think happens between Penn State and West Virginia at noon?
Yeah, originally I was given my prediction earlier this week, and I said 33-17. I do think it's going to take a little bit more time for our offense to get going. Looking at the weather, I think that is going to play a big factor. I'm going to take some points off for both teams. I think the final score will be Penn State 24, West Virginia 13.
I have to give my prediction on like Tuesday of every week. So by the time we get to here on the Tailgate show, I've changed it during the regular season. Luckily, I've done all my scouting because I'm not in the week-to-week grind of football. So I'm going to stick with it. 31-21 Penn State. And those numbers mean absolutely nothing to me. They are representative of what I think these two teams are capable of. I think Penn State can put up in the 30s. I think 38 is also reasonable, but I also think 28 is reasonable in terms of that strike zone of plus or minus. And 21 points is because I respect Garrett Green and I respect Neil Brown and that offense. I think they can challenge at times this Penn State defense. Some of that aggressive downfield passing, if they load the box, if Penn State's defensive line is not able to control the game and play on the other side of the line of scrimmage, which I think they can do, I do think Garrett Green can cause some problems in this game. I do think Abdul Carter, you and I are in the same boat of let's see him play defensive end first before we put him in the first round. Let's see what he can do, because I think all that stuff about contain, I trust him to be a game wrecker. I don't necessarily trust him to stay in his rushing lane, because when you're a speed rusher, it's a natural proclivity to get too far upfield.
That was kind of Abdul's thing at linebacker, is he would do things he wasn't really supposed to be doing. And it was like, that's why we're going to put you a defensive lineman, pin your ears back, and you get to go. There's still a little bit of that there at defensive end where you need to have that contain, especially today against Garrett Green.
I want to give a shout out to producer Kyle. If you're watching the Blue White Illustrated YouTube stream, he was working on the audio and in the background of the shot during the first probably 30 minutes of the show. I wanted to have him come and give his prediction on air, but currently he would have to come and rip this mic away from me, which I would then fight him, because that's just like, you don't give up the mic. 34-21 is his prediction, Penn State over West Virginia. So let's get into our keys to the game. Landon, your keys to the game.
Yep, I got three of them here. Number one, run the ball if you're Penn State. Penn State is 9-0 when Katron Allen has 80 or more rushing yards.
Ooh.
Yeah, dug that one up. I went through, look.
You got these good stats, man.
I just sometimes I just go on ESPN stats and I just look for things. And that is a trend I saw. When Katron Allen gets going, Penn State wins 9-0 when Katron Allen has 80 or more rushing yards. Number two, do not let Garrett Green use his legs, whether you have to spy Abdul Carter, Tony Rojas. Like we said, keep those rush lanes, keep the integrity of those rush lanes. Do not let him be a game breaker, especially on third down. And then number three, try to take the crowd out of it. Do not let the crowd be a factor late in the game. That means, hey, we got to get up, run the ball effectively, and don't get in third and longs where the crowd can really get involved and kind of be shaky on Drew Aller and that offensive line. Take the crowd out of the game early.
Before I give my keys to the game, I want to give some love to the people here in the chat one last time. KJ Johnson says, can we get Landon on more shows? He's proving offensive linemen are the smartest players on the field. Absolutely. Well, he's going to be here for every single game this season, so whether it's Bowling Green or not, come back. Watch this show with us on it. We are going to be live outside of the Bryce Jordan Center ticket office during home games. We'll be broadcasting from a location here or otherwise 90 minutes before every game. 3 hours before every game all season long. So, yes, we're going to have Landon back. And Landon, anytime you're welcome on the BWI Live show. One last thing is rain. Our weather experts in the chat, which I am not one of those, say 3 p.m. So presumably in the fourth quarter at the earliest is when the rain is supposed to show up. And then finally, Ryan asks, on offense or defense first, if Penn State gets the option. This leads into my key of the game. And it's not just for now, it's for the whole season. Penn State needs to play with a lead. They cannot trail this year because of that offensive line. Until proven otherwise, I need to see those tackles hold up. I think Nick Dawkins, I need to see him be that more athletic player that we didn't see last year. I thought he struggled when he was in the game to stay on his feet at times. And I know he's well-liked. I know he's a friend of yours. And it's always one of those fine lines of, I think he can do it. I want him to be able to do it. And I want to see him do that today. But they have to start out with the lead. So I think that means putting the defense on the field. I think that unless you believe you can come out and control the flow of the game and you can score first, you got to put your best foot forward. I guess that means defense. I always want the ball first. I'm an impatient person. I want to attack. I would take the ball, but I think they got to play with their defense.
Yeah, no, I do think, and I think if they give the option, defense will go out first because you give the ball to them on their 20-25, try to get a quick 3 and out. Now, James Franklin is huge on field position. He's always putting up numbers. Hey, if we start at our own 40, we have X% chance to score here. If we start on our 30, it goes down a little bit. He's huge on that. I think he knows, hey, I don't really want to go out there, new coordinator, new offense, all that stuff right away. Let's let our defense get out there first, settle the nerves, and then let the offense get after it with potentially good field position.
So we're going to see how all of that plays out today. Penn State, West Virginia at noon. Of course, we all have our own post-game shows, I think, coming up after the game. So whatever is your flavor, you can check it out. Of course, I'm talking, so I'll tell you about the Blue White Illustrated live post-game show immediately after the game. You've got the post-game show here on 99.5 The Bus with Jason Lord, and Landon has his own post-game show live from Campus Stakes. So pick your favorite, watch all of them after the game, absorb all your Penn State football content. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate Show.